At the dawn of the 18th century, Sweden stood as one of the most formidable powers in Europe, a nation whose influence stretched far beyond its borders, commanding respect, fear, and a grudging admiration from its neighbors. Though today it is often remembered as calm, neutral, and relatively distant, at that time it was a kingdom forged by decades of warfare, a military empire whose very survival depended on discipline, speed, and relentless ambition. Its territories encompassed Finland, Estonia, Livonia, and a vast expanse of the Baltic coast, and its armies were renowned for their precision, efficiency, and the incredible resilience of their soldiers. Every man was trained to hold formation under fire, to advance across frozen rivers, through snow-choked forests, and over mud-soaked plains, to endure hunger, exhaustion, and harsh weather without faltering. The Swedish army relied on momentum, courage, and strict discipline, a machine of human will and steel that few in Europe could match. At the center of this empire stood a young king, Charles XII, barely a teenager when he ascended the throne in the year 1700. Yet from the very beginning, it was clear that he was no ordinary monarch. Charles lived like a soldier, sleeping on the ground alongside his men, sharing their rations, and enduring the same hardships. He was disciplined, fearless, and possessed a relentless drive that inspired extraordinary loyalty among his troops. Men followed him through blizzards, across frozen rivers, and into enemy fire, convinced that he would never ask them to attempt what he would not endure himself. Charles combined charisma, audacity, and tactical genius in a way that few leaders before or after him would match, and his soldiers internalized his belief that courage, speed, and discipline could overcome almost any obstacle. Europe watched the young king with a mixture of admiration, fear, and cautious skepticism. Denmark, Poland, Lithuania, and Russia formed a coalition, confident that Sweden's overreach would eventually collapse. At the heart of this alliance was Tsar Peter of Russia, a visionary ruler determined to modernize his army, improve logistics, and challenge Swedish supremacy in the Baltic. Couriers and spies moved swiftly across the continent, carrying rumors of Swedish prowess and Charles' relentless campaigns. Many European powers believed that Sweden's victories were impressive but fragile, that the young king's audacity would soon encounter the limits of logistics, terrain, and manpower. Charles did not hesitate. In a series of lightning-fast maneuvers, he neutralized Denmark almost immediately, forcing the Danish king to withdraw from the war. Then he turned his attention eastward toward Russia. In the harsh winter of 1700, near the city of Narva, the Swedish army faced a Russian force vastly superior in numbers. Snow fell relentlessly, obscuring vision and chilling the bones of every man. Temperatures plunged far below freezing, rivers froze solid, and the forested landscape became a labyrinth of ice and snow. Yet the Swedish troops advanced in perfect formation, moving with a discipline and speed that seemed almost unnatural. Each volley, each charge, each coordinated movement shattered the Russian lines. What could have been a disaster in the heart of winter became a stunning Swedish victory, a triumph that would echo through the halls of Europe. Europe watched in astonishment. Russia, once assumed backward and disorganized, had been humiliated by a smaller, disciplined army led by a teenage king. Sweden now appeared unstoppable. Charles XII was celebrated as a military genius, a man whose courage and audacity could rewrite the rules of war. Yet victory, as history often demonstrates, is a fragile thing. Confidence grew, and with it arrogance. Charles began to believe that speed, aggression, and personal bravery alone could solve any strategic problem. He underestimated his enemies, overestimated his forces, and allowed his victories to lull him into dangerous complacency. Instead of pressing the advantage in Russia while his enemy remained disorganized, Charles turned south, pursuing enemies across Poland and Saxony. For years, the Swedish army marched without pause. Victories were won, but each came at a steep cost. Men, horses, supplies, morale. Soldiers endured freezing nights in open camps, rain-soaked marches, mud-choked roads, and constant hunger. Disease spread rapidly in tightly packed encampments, decimating units before they could face the enemy. Horses collapsed under strain, weapons and artillery became unreliable in harsh conditions, and entire units disappeared into the wilderness, lost to exhaustion, starvation, or cold. Yet Charles pressed on, driven by his belief that relentless momentum and courage would always prevail. Meanwhile, Russia was changing. Tsar Peter, having learned from defeat, reorganized his army with painstaking attention to detail. He modernized training, built weapons factories, stocked supply depots, and created a disciplined, professional military capable of matching or exceeding Swedish tactics. By the time Charles returned east, he faced a far more capable opponent than at Narva, an army that could survive winter, operate across vast distances, and strike with precision. In 1708, Charles invaded Russia, expecting a short, decisive campaign. He envisioned a final battle that would force Peter to surrender, securing Swedish dominance for decades. Instead, the Swedish army entered a vast and hostile land. Russian forces avoided direct engagement, retreating deeper into the interior while destroying villages, crops, and anything that could feed or supply the advancing Swedish forces. Supply lines stretched impossibly thin. Soldiers marched for days with insufficient food, water, or shelter. Exhaustion gnawed at the ranks long before any enemy was encountered. Summer passed, and the army's condition worsened. Disease spread unchecked. Morale collapsed. Units disbanded under the pressure of relentless marches, extreme climate, and dwindling resources. Men, trained to endure hardship, began to falter under the strain of hunger, cold, and fear. Yet Charles pressed onward, believing that retreat would shatter the loyalty of his soldiers and diminish his reputation as a leader. The harsh realities of winter, the vast distances, and the unforgiving Russian landscape were ignored, each step forward a gamble with human lives. Then came the winter of 1708, merciless and unrelenting. Temperatures plunged far below freezing. Snow buried roads and rivers, wind cut through clothing and flesh, and frostbite claimed hundreds overnight. Weapons froze, ammunition became useless, and horses perished in the snow. Entire regiments vanished, lost to hunger, disease, and the cruel elements rather than the enemy. The once mighty Swedish army, a symbol of Europe's most formidable discipline and training, was being destroyed not by human adversaries, but by nature itself. By spring, tens of thousands had perished. The survivors were physically broken, mentally exhausted, and haunted by the relentless winter. In 1709, near Poltava, the remnants of the Swedish army finally faced the rebuilt Russian forces. The Russians were numerous, well-trained, fully supplied, and strategically positioned. Charles, wounded and weakened, could not command effectively. The battle that followed was catastrophic. Artillery tore through the Swedish ranks, counterattacks failed, elite units collapsed. What remained of Sweden's once mighty army was annihilated in a single day. Charles fled south into exile, leaving survivors to surrender or scatter. The Swedish Empire, once feared across Europe, collapsed almost immediately. Territories were lost. Influence vanished. Sweden became a regional power rather than a dominant force. Russia emerged transformed. Victory at Poltava marked the rise of a major European power, reshaping the balance of power for generations. The fall of Sweden was not caused by a single enemy, battle, or misfortune. It was the culmination of overconfidence, miscalculation, logistical failure, and the indifferent cruelty of nature. Exhaustion, hunger, disease, harsh weather, and vast distances punished every error. Even the most disciplined army, led by the bravest king, could not survive the combined weight of human ambition and the indifferent force of winter. In the end, Sweden did not fall solely to human adversaries. Its collapse was the product of ambition, pride, and a winter that punished mistakes without mercy. It serves as a stark reminder that even the strongest empires and the bravest leaders are vulnerable to the unforgiving realities of geography, climate, and time. History often celebrates victories, but it is in failure that the greatest lessons endure, shaping the destinies of nations and the course of entire continents.